Hello, everybody, and thank you for being here. It's so exciting to be with you all. My name is Maria Fernandez Cajon, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Fujiwara. I am an associate professor in Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies, and I am the vice president for diversity and equity of United Academics.
Hi, my name is Melissa Grayboys. I'm a faculty member in the history department. I'm also head of African Studies and part of the Center for Global Health, and I'm a caretaker for 3 young people in my household.
I'm Deborah Green. I'm in the Department of Religion on the bargaining team in United Academics. I'm a caretaker for my now 16-year-old son and my father, who's 92.
Hello, everyone. Great to see everybody here. I'm Lynn Stephen, professor in the Department of Anthropology, also participating faculty in Indigenous Race and Ethnic Studies. I participate in taking care of my 90-year-old mom, and also have in the past children and adult children. Thanks for being here.
And we also would like to have Kendall McCone introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kendall. I am here just to sort of give a student's perspective on everything. And I am very, very grateful to have been able to be a part of this. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Sangeeta, do you want to say hello? Oh, you're muted.
I'm Sangeeta Gopal, Interim Director for the Center for Study and Society, for the Center for Women in Society, sorry, and partnering with UA in hosting this teach-in, and I'm very appreciative of all the panelists for all the time and energy and thoughtfulness that they have put into this. I'm basically transitioning caregiver to a 12-year-old who doesn't seem to much want my care right now, but that's a different issue. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Is that everybody? So I want to just share with you some of our goals. So we're going to switch the slide. So there have been multiple efforts from various units on campus to shift the institution in terms of caregiving and caregiving support. One thing that is really instrumental in this process is changing the narrative. And we're going to be thinking about changing the narrative of caregiving throughout our time together today, in terms of thinking about how the narrative of caregiving perpetuates the inequality that we are dealing with, right? Also, another goal for us today is community building. We really love seeing everybody here. You know, we know that to make any kind of major changes at this place, it takes a collective voice and collective power and organizing. So what better way to do it with people who, you know, understand and care about the same things. So we're really thinking about community building as well. We also want to gather information. We tend to be isolated on campus. You know, we have these little pockets where people come together, but, you know, people are still isolated. We're still hearing stories of people who are dealing with really extreme circumstances and dealing with them alone. So we want to gather information. We want to hear what people are experiencing in their various units. And we also, you know, have been doing this kind of work for quite some time, and we want to share what we've gathered in terms of, you know, strategies, in terms of the kinds of incremental changes we've made here, some big, a lot small, but we are excited to share strategies with folks, many we've gathered from these various spaces. So with that, I hope that looking at some of the responses in the chat, it seems like that's kind of what people are hoping to get. And hopefully we'll, by the end, walk away with a stronger sense of we are a community, we do have a collective voice, and we can continue to make changes. So with that, I am going to, Maria is going to share a little bit of words on caregiving. She's been doing amazing research, and so it's a very research-informed statement. Take it away, Maria.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you everybody again for joining. This is very exciting, and I hope it's the first teaching of many. So when we think about care work and caregiving, many of us automatically think of nurses or doctors or domestic workers or nannies or nursing home staff and others who provide care for children, for individuals with disabilities, for aging adults, or for those with medical needs. But for many of us, caregiving is a daily part of our lives, part of our unpaid labor that we ordinarily take on as members of families, of our neighborhoods, of our schools, of our workplace, of our tribes, of our churches. Some of us have chosen our caregiving roles. Others have found themselves caring for somebody or receiving care for themselves in different moments of their lives. Many of us care for children, others for their aging parents, and others for family and loved ones with disabilities or who need medical care. Beyond our immediate circles, many of us care for extensive, non-local networks of friends and family, and some even care for strangers that live hundreds of miles away. Caregiving may look very different for each of us and involve anything like providing financial resources in a time of need or problem solving, sending remittances, giving emotional support, offering transport, intergenerational advice, or access to technology, just to mention a few. There are more of us who are caregivers than what we imagine. In the US alone, there are over 43 million unpaid family caregivers caring for somebody at home. According to recent estimates, 1 in 3 people in the US are in active caregiving relationships now. Today, we invite you to think of caregivers and caregiving expansively. In the context of our academic workplace, remember that caregiving is not just about parents or families in any traditional sense. By caregivers, we mean anyone who regularly and often without financial compensation looks after a child, a dependent, a sick, an elderly, or any individual experiencing disability. Though caregiving has important gender implications, it's not only a women's issue. And though care work inequities have been highlighted by the pandemic, they're not new, and they're not a temporary crisis. We all need and we all depend on care for us, for our communities, and for our workplace. Without a single exception, we all have been cared for by someone, and most probably will be called on to care for somebody at some point in our lives. Today, we invite you to change the narrative about care as something that we choose, that is our individual responsibility, that happens inside our home, and that we need to deal with it alone. As the pandemic changed our lives, and the Zoom meetings made our messy living rooms, and our wandering cats, and our partners in pajamas, and our screaming children visible to everybody, here, we want to make caregiving and care work visible as well, reflecting on our personal challenges, but also on the institutional responsibilities of our workplace. We're calling on you to recognize your caregiving roles, but if you're not there yet, just to learn how you can be a caregiver ally. We invite you to reflect on your current caregiving challenges, but please just don't stop there. We want to strategize solutions. We want to work with you and recognize our differences and our different goals and needs. We invite you to imagine with us what our work could look like if rather than a private burden or a public liability, caregiving was seen as an opportunity to build more inclusive and a more diverse workplace. Like me, many of you moved away from your families and your friends to start working here at UO. And let us use this time together to think, to talk, to plan, but most importantly, to realize that here, with all of us present in this virtual room, we are creating our new caregiving community. Thank you so much and welcome to this teaching. Next slide.
Thank you, Maria. Before we move on, I also want to thank Janae Wild and Christy Hammond, who are there. They have made all of this possible for us. Janae is monitoring the entry and exit, and Christy's monitoring the chat, and we'll be handling breakout rooms in a minute. So one of the things that we wanted to kind of do is think about how we have gotten to where we are today. And this is a very, very schematic way to sort of think about the kind of work that has been done around caregiving. And it really wasn't until the mid-1990s when the Family Medical Leave Act and the Oregon Family Leave Act were passed that we had any kind of consciousness around supporting families, right? And really though, even at that time, while the university had to allow people to take leave, protected leave, we did not have any kind of paid leave, family leave at all. And it wasn't until 2010, and Ellen Scott, who is here with us today, was part of the faculty who led the committee to institute family paid family leave for the university, because there's just such a wide array. Some departments were generous and some weren't. Right? So it really wasn't until 2010 when the university established any kind of paid family leave, utilizing sick leave or whatever, and participating in assisting faculty. And then in 2013, that was then instituted into the United Academics CBA. So now we do have a paid family leave program that offers, a quarter of leave when you give birth or adopt, and then another quarter of modified duties. That was not established until 2013. And really from 2013 to 2019 has been ongoing struggles to get more, awareness and support around childcare expenses, childcare availability, family leave for chronic illnesses, dealing with aging parents. But it was 2019 when the pandemic hit and everything shut down, and nobody had we were all scrambling, right? And so the university then did make some kind of awareness that, wow, people are really having to juggle a lot. And that is when really strategic efforts by the Caregiving Campaign really moved into motion. And I'm going to let Lynn Steven take the next slide and tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. I think the pandemic revealed a lot of things that probably everybody in this room already knows. But I think the role of faculty activism and sort of pushing back and trying to dialogue with administration is what I want to highlight here. The Provost Office did establish a coronavirus tenure clock extension in spring of 2020. And in addition to that, there were a lot of conversations going on. I worked with Maria Escallon and Michelle McKinley in trying to establish conversations and dialogue, and CSWS established the Caregiver Campaign, really pushing for a number. We had a petition, we had surveys, testimonials, trying to get out a lot of information, and also putting forth a lot of very concrete ideas, some of which are in the article that the union is bringing forth in bargaining. We published op-eds, we did meetings. UA also met with the administration. UA also did a survey and sort of brought testimonials. So I think between CSWS and our union, we really began to assemble a lot of information, a lot of good ideas, and also to communicate and dialogue with people in other places. That summer, HR established a relief fund to assist employees who have experienced reasonable and necessary personal, family, and living expenses as a result of COVID-19. We continued the campaign in 20 and 21. Again, as the situation shifted and the university shifted, and we came back to being in person, but not everyone's situation was the same. And we really continued to push for folks dealing with closed care facilities, child care center setting, closing down, and people who were vulnerable or had vulnerable family members that they were taking care of, who were not ready to step into a situation where they might be exposed. In June of 2021, the Provost's office announced the COVID hardship course releases for untenured faculty who experienced hardship in relation to their research. And this was a positive quality. Next slide, Melissa. Can we get the next slide?
It's done.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Thank you. And the caregiving campaign continued in these efforts in 20 and 21, and also trying to balance this concern over, how COVID was affecting reviews and research productivity with what was really happening for folks with unvaccinated children or people doing other kinds of caretaking. So I'm going to pass it back to Lynn, the other Lynn, to take us to the end of this timeline.
So I'm sure many of you know the Caregivers Campaign and United Academics fought hard for flexibility as we were going back to in-person. It was a very stressful time, and it was very distressing to not sort of get the kinds of flexibility that we were really hoping for, given our family situations, given our caregiving situations. The United Academics formed a subcommittee on caregiving that met with the administration regularly, and then Debbie Green was very instrumental in writing the caregiver article that was presented to the administration during bargaining just last quarter, and she's going to talk about that a little bit later in our share out. But that article is on the table, and the administration is still going to come back in response to that article, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, which led us to this teach-in. We're just feeling like, what is it going to take for the institution to understand the complexity of people's lives and to recognize that our caregiving communities, our caregiving families, our circuits matter, right? And especially at a time of the pandemic, where we feel like our members within our community and within our families are being put in harm's way. And to get that understood, it just seems like, why is that so hard to get across? And how do we communicate that with, a way in which the administration can hear us and then adjust and allow the kinds of flexibilities we need? We're not asking to not teach. We want to teach, right? But we want to teach safely. We want to do our research safely. We want to work safely so everybody in our communities can be safe and cared for, right? So that is what led to this teach-in, just trying to think about what else can we do? We have things to do that will make a difference. And then at the end of the teach-in, we want to think more about what's next and what can we do after we sort of compile more information. So we're going to move into an exercise, and we're going to put in the chat, in case you came after these links were put in the chat. Actually, looks like it might have just been put in. So Janae, that link is for the end. So it's if we could put the one in.
I think it's there, Lynn. It should be the one for right now to go into.
Yeah.
Did I just post it?
Oh, did you just post it? Okay, thank you. So we would like you, we're going to break you into small groups and in breakout rooms. And hopefully you can click on this link and you can all see the Google Slides. And we would like you to, in your groups, to discuss one major struggle you experienced regarding caregiving, or something that you saw a caretaking colleague or student struggle with. And then second, if you could discuss any examples of positive or supportive experiences around caregiving at the university that you experienced, or you saw or heard about your caregiving colleagues or at another university that you thought was a really good, supportive kind of act that made a difference. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms. If you're in a group and you are like on really small technology and you can't see the questions, they're on the Google slide, feel free to share your screen in the small group. And then we'll come back and we'll pull together these major themes as we think about the kinds of strategies and resources we have compiled. Maybe we can go ahead and move into, we wanted to share with you all some of the kinds of strategies and information that we have been gathering. I think from the exercise we just did, it's very clear to see that we are experiencing major institutional gaps in terms of the kind of care that people are doing on, here at the university, the complexity of our lives, and like thinking about elder care, family members with disabilities, chronic illness, mental illness. Those are all conditions that we are experiencing that require caretaking. And we don't have a system that allows for long-term caretaking. Right? We tend to see it as a crisis. You can take FMLA, you can take 12 weeks off, you can take a quarter off. But a lot of our situations are ongoing and they become part of our daily lives. One thing that very rarely gets discussed are, caring for people with addictions or recovery, prolonged mental health situations, particularly different forms of disabilities, the invisible disabilities, how much time we have to spend with our kids with learning disabilities, like those kinds of things have not even entered the conversation around institutional support as a family-friendly institution. So keeping in mind that as we sort of share out some of the kinds of resources we have acquired and accumulated, we know that there are major serious gaps that will need to be part of our thinking as we continue to fight for these things. So next slide, and I believe it is Maria.
Yes. So thank you, Lynn. And just following up on that, we found that a big hurdle that we have encountered with the UO is there's a reluctance of the university to target policies or programs or support directly to caregivers. So far hasn't been any university-wide, for example, any collection of data of who identifies as a caregiver. And this information is not collected in any sort of internal grants, for instance, in applications for internal grants. There are no metrics. There's simply no metrics to know how many of us identify our caregivers. So we think that without considering caregivers as a demographic, the vulnerabilities that are experienced by this group are not resolved as they often compound and they intersect with others, like, related to gender or racial or ethnic identities or socioeconomic or citizenship status. So inadvertently, so far what's happened is the type of responses that we received so far that are not targeted exclusively, or some of them could be targeted to caregivers, have actually entrenched some of the challenges and the problems that this demographic is experiencing. Now, the point of this is not just to say that this is a bummer, but it's something that we can change, and we can do something about it. So around the US and around the world, dozens of universities have already started addressing the systemic inequities that have been aggravated by the pandemic and by caregiving challenges. And many have explicitly developed all sorts of ways of capturing information in that demographic. And in general terms, what this slide is showing you is, since 2020, what have been kind of the target areas in which universities have developed some kind of policy. And what we found is there's most of them have done some kind of financial support in terms of like grants or discretionary funds or summer stipends. Most of the universities across the US that we've studied give additional time, let it be that in tenure clock or review extensions, some of them offering COVID medical leave or research leaves or teaching releases of that front. Very few are going beyond that, providing, for instance, some additional resources in terms of backup care, subsidizing backup care, some offering virtual tutoring for school-aged children. Other type of accommodations or policies have been around flexibility in terms of teaching schedules or adjustable workloads. And then there's a few universities that use the opportunity provided by the pandemic to start research centers or groups that increase representation in these matters, like workforces or care caucus or surveys or childcare coalitions, or all sorts of different things that have moved around faculty, students, and staff, just finding different ways of collecting information and strategizing by themselves. So this is to show you a little bit of an idea of like the map of the type of things that have happened, and also to see where does the UO kind of lie. So Melissa, you can change to the next slide. And this is not for you to read all of it, but it's kind of to understand where we are as a university right now. And in my own assessment, I see the UO kind of in the middle, lower kind of level of what has provided in terms of it has given what most universities have is a little bit of money, a little bit of a teaching release for some, and a COVID extension, like a year in terms of expanding deadlines for review. The most robust of these responses, for instance, you can look at Stanford as in the corner in the left. They include several of the different things that we explored in the last slide, just putting different elements together, and they have explicitly targeted dependent care provision and subsidized for childcare and for elder care that are totally independent from the pandemic response and the pandemic needs. There are a lot of this could be a little bit of a unfair kind of assessment yet for the picture of what's happening in terms of caregiving across the US, because there are a lot of research and advocacy groups that are still working on it. And there's still yet to be seen if any structural reforms come out of it. But what we find is that so far, as you can see, there's different forms of some more structural, independent of pandemic resources that have been offered, like dependent care for travel grants, that's independent, that's UC San Diego, and that's independent from COVID. Indiana, for instance, has a gender equity task force that started dealing with equity issues broadly in terms of gender, of course, coming from the pandemic, but gender in terms of salaries and so forth, that go beyond. And I think that what we see here is one overarching conclusion is that most universities have not stepped yet to the post-crisis mode. And most of the things have been addressed, like the low-hanging fruit, what can we do for this crisis moment? And there's still yet to be seen bigger reforms and bigger structural policies that can change the playing field. Like, for example, funds allowing faculty to use funds towards dependent care expenses, or subsidizing backup care, or implementing retroactive salary leveling adjustments after parental leave or after a COVID year extension. So I haven't seen yet that many universities engaging in that kind of structural change. Alyssa?
Hi, everyone. So I want to talk really briefly about a few international examples. And I'll start off by recognizing that there's a lot of gaps in definitions of caretaking, or that don't translate across different countries and with national laws. And there's not a lot of awareness and programmatic support at different universities about, as Lynn F. mentioned earlier, chronic conditions, issues around substance abuse and mental illness, and other forms of hidden disabilities that aren't quite as obvious. However, a few heartening examples from other parts of the world. At the University of Norway, many units have chosen to voluntarily schedule all meetings and require activities during the hours of the public school day, which means that most things end by 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, as a way to recognize the labor that often comes after in the afternoons. At the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, they really advertise when recruiting international faculty members, the structural supports that are in place at a national level about parental care, about sick leave, and about paid leave to take care of family members. But this is, again, very oriented around parent-child relationships and not thinking necessarily about elder care or ongoing chronic conditions. University of Stuttgart talks about having a family-friendly designation, but there's not much meat behind that, even in the EU. Thinking about, it's a signer of the Family and Higher Education Charter, which guarantees things like paid maternity leave, parental leave, caregiving leave, flex time, telecommuting, childcare, and physical spaces on campus for lactation. Many things that the union has fought for, and some of which have been secured as part of the CBA. And then more anecdotally, I can talk about having worked with co-authors and other academics in Italy and Norway and Sweden, the month of August, thinking about institutional norms and cultural expectations that make space for caregiving. The month of August is typically a holiday that projects pause, people don't respond to emails, they're not present at the university, and there's an overt conversation about stepping back from the university, about making time for family and for doing caregiving activities that maybe are more time intensive. And I find that a refreshing different from what we see here in the United States.
Oh, I think that's me. Hi, everyone. So the bargaining team has been trying to work on some of these issues, and we've presented the administration with a caregiving article, and it's a start. It's not an end, and I should also say that the administration is not going to accept this article as is. They will come back with many changes and many things they don't want to pay for, but they can never know about a problem, or we can't start working on a problem until we at least let them know what the problem is. And we're usually more creative problem solvers than they are. So that's why we have some solutions there. So in terms of daycare, these problems have been going on at daycare for a long time at the Olem Center, and they're varied from time to time, but a lot of them have stayed pretty consistent. And the university itself did 2 studies on Olem, and then never did anything with how the studies turned out or what the consultants advised them to do. So one of the things we suggested with Olem Center was, of course, to fully staff it again and to reinstate the aftercare that they got rid of during COVID. We also have been very aware of the very high cost of the daycare center for a long time for the Olem Center. And it's a little bit of a head scratcher because the center is supposed to be heavily subsidized by the university. So it was a little confusing every year that they would do one of those studies, why Olin parents are paying the same or even more than other daycares in town. So we're seeking for them to reduce the cost. And we're also seeking from the university to actually help people out so that Olin would not present more than 7% of their combined, family income. So that's one of the things we're working on. And of course, we asked them to increase the slots, the numbers of children that they can take, which means either enlarging the facility or finding another facility or contracting with somebody else. We asked them to take the parent committee more seriously and to give them more authority. And we asked them to look at sort of how the internal organization and reporting for Olin works, because we're not sure that that's really benefiting the families or the kids very well. And then, as I said, staffing is a major issue that we cover in the article. And we also asked them to start considering some outside funding sources and having them put some time and energy into that so that the center could be even more subsidized, which when it was founded, it was very involved in sort of studies on kids. So there was a lot of money that came in the door that way. So in addition to asking them to reduce the costs of daycare to that 7% level, we also, in terms of compensation to some degree, we asked them to reduce the cost of parking. And particularly, we asked them to figure out some reserved parking, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the problem is that the parking doesn't really work for parents, but on top of that, or caregivers, but on top of that, the issue of you leave campus, you need to come back, and then you can't find any parking in the area that you were parked in is quite a problem. So we asked them to work on that. We also asked them to allow faculty to use stipends or internal grants or things like this from the university for care, either for elderly family members or children. And we asked them that they would somehow figure out a way to get some money to people when they are required to be on campus or work and it's not regular working hours, so that they would be reimbursed either for sitter costs or other things like that. So that's kind of under compensation. Then for care support, we asked them to figure out something for finals week where parents could do after hours or on the weekend that everyone's grading, work out something so that there would be a place where people could drop off their kids. This would probably be mostly school age kids, right? And they would pay regular babysitting costs. Then we asked for them to get the database in order for the individual child care providers, and we laid out some plans on things that they need to do for that. That we also asked, again, under that with individual child care providers, coming back to that idea of the weekends and times when you aren't in regular work hours, that you actually get reimbursed from some kind of babysitter fund for that. And then again, care support, the parking falls under care support in general. And then we also asked them to consider remote teaching and work for a variety of situations that people find themselves in. Finally, under stipends and flexibility, We asked for reimbursement for child and elder care when people are traveling. We asked for flexibility in scheduling of courses for people that have caregiving responsibilities. And we also asked that in times of very systematic disruption, where everything is disrupted, as COVID was, that the parents actually get the authority to decide how best to care for their families before they are required by work to do certain things. So this goes back to that idea of many parents wanting to be able to teach online when they had children who could not be vaccinated. We've had situations where people wanted to teach online from another country because they had an elderly parent that was very ill. So those are some of the things that we've been working on. And now, Lynn, I'm not sure how you want to handle this. If you want me to, okay, there you go.
Okay, so I actually wanted to pause for a second, and Vera raised a great question in the chat that Debbie, I think, is related. And Vera, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, it was just that I recalled when the night campus was originally being planned that a childcare center was originally part of that, and then it got cut very early on, and I was keeping a sharp eye on that because of issues about gender equity in science and what the message that was sending to for this new campus. So I was just thinking that perhaps that should be a structural part of this union list of requests, is that thinking about expansions to campus should always automatically include an expansion of care.
I should say that it's not like they were automatically going to increase the size of Olem because of the Night Center. It happened to be monies from the Night Center that did the investigation of Olem and that paid for this outside consultant. And she suggested that if there wasn't a way to expand Olem, on the footprint that it's obviously on, that yes, that what they would do is either contract with another company or maybe even look to build an expansion, somewhere else that wouldn't be tied, just to the campus site. But yeah, we have asked for that pretty strongly. We've basically asked them to do something about these two surveys that were done, not surveys, but two consulting reports that were done, studies that were done, that both suggested they needed to do something. So yes.
Debbie, can I ask a follow-up question? I feel like I've heard from the provost visiting different units and faculty meetings said repeatedly that he doesn't think the university should be in the childcare business, period. And I'm wondering, does that just make this a non-starter, that the university is actually looking to pull out entirely rather than even just continue what we have? And is that an official position that the university administration has right now?
I don't think so. My experience is that if you stay here a little while, provosts come and go. But I think that the fact that they use Olem as a draw and an advertising tool to get faculty to move here, I'd be very surprised if that actually goes anywhere. And I also think that there's a lot of other people besides the provost that would be kind of up in arms about that. He may not have used Olem, but there's a lot of senior level staff that actually have sent their kids through Olem. So I'd be very surprised. And especially his comments really weird when the state is moving in the complete opposite direction.
I've heard the notion of subcontracting as being part of the vision of what we might be heading toward, but it's definitely something we have to keep our attention on.
And that is one of the suggestions that comes out of both of those studies, is the idea of contracting out childcare, which would be fine if the UAUO continues to subsidize.
Okay. Oh, Vera, do you have one more question? I see a hand up.
Well, I just wanted to point out Maddie's comments in the chat about how contracting it out is difficult given that there really is a huge shortage in the whole community. So we can't rely on community resources. It has to be created by us because there is nothing, even if we had the money, there's nobody to hire.
Yeah, I mean, this contracting out would be contracting out with one of the national daycare, providers, and maybe providing the building that it was in, that kind of thing. So I think that's understood, is that, the resources aren't right here now. But we'll see what happens. This is a start, you guys, that's all we can do. And, really, when I started this, I was like, okay, let's just work with the footprint that we have at Olin right now. Right. But then I realized, wow, we have all these, non-tenure track faculty who can't even think about applying to Olin or getting on that waiting list. So there's some real problems there.
Okay, well, I think we'll switch to the next slide, which I'm actually going to talk about, and this is going to be very quick. Just some leave options, which I think most people are probably familiar with here, in addition to the faculty parental leave and the things that are now in the CBA that protect for paid family leave. The options are around FMLA and OFLA, and this does provide space for childcare and the care of adult children who are disabled and with either mental or physical disabilities. There is space there for elder care and end-of-life care. Those are unpaid. Traditionally, they are unpaid unless you have accrued paid leave. I will say I would put in the positive category of caregiving flexibility and need to access these benefits that Kenny Lai, whose email is hrleaves@uoregon.edu, is very knowledgeable, very prompt, very professional, and laying out what some of the options are for faculty who need to either take leaves that they know about in advance or hurriedly take leaves. And then I've just linked to the parental leave policy and the flexible work policy, pointing out that the clear gaps here are that there are a lot of variations unit to unit with the support of supervisors, and supervisors can either make things easier or make things much, much, much harder in terms of accessing these leaves. So with that, Lynn S., I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to talk a little bit about ideas that really are about changing the culture at the U of O and making care work visible. And I want to be clear, these are ideas that we can use in the spaces we control that should happen at the same time that we're pushing for structural change through bargaining. So just kind of sharing some things that have come up in my own and other people's units. But I think these kinds of things can make a difference in terms of bringing caretaking to the table as a part of unit and department structures. We've talked already about flexible scheduling of courses, allowing people to double up or move courses to a different quarter or to a different year. Another idea, I hope this really happens, that we get funds established at the university, but also among colleagues. For example, the way that holiday bonuses are paid in a lot of departments at the U of O is that everyone makes a donation to a fund, and then that's how bonuses are paid. Well, it's also possible to use that same model to elevate this issue by creating a caregiver fund that your department controls that people can tap into. Asking senior or tenured faculty to teach an extra course to relieve junior faculty. That's happened in my department and maybe some other departments this year. Create a care ally plan in your unit with concrete support. And I'm also, could you change to the next slide, please? I'm going to suggest establishing a care committee that is a part of departmental structures, right? We have undergraduate committees and graduate committees and maybe diversity committees, but creating a care committee that has a voice in faculty meetings, that has a representative in executive meetings, and regularly reports, and is a place where people can come with concerns and to brainstorm solutions, so that care becomes a part of the regular kind of organizational structure that we have in our units. Another idea is to create a unit level inventory, just so people have information about how much time faculty and staff are spending engaging in care work, just to give people information. And I know there was a comment in the chat before. This was actually a suggestion that was made, I think, a couple of times, and chairs were, told that this would be a violation of privacy. But I think establishing within a unit a committee and ways of sharing this information, that's anonymous, is important. So those are just some ideas that can help support. I think, Melissa, if we can go to the next one, making care work visible, and can support also this idea of a university-wide care fund, and sort of creating a culture of flexibility in university service assignments. We're supposed to do service in our departments. A lot of times we're doing service that's invisible because it's not like in the official university grid. But also allowing for flexibility of this, but making all of that different service visible. And finally, really increasing the practice of sort of mentoring and interim participation in service roles and leadership roles when people have to step back. That's what I got. Thank you.
So before we sort of step into really sort of thinking forward, is there anything that we need to address in the chat? Any questions, anything like that? All right. We want to take this opportunity to really think about making things happen, right? And making change happen. And I know for a lot of us, we are overwhelmed, especially from seeing the slides, that we often feel like we don't have the time or the space or the bandwidth for one more thing. So we really want to think about how do we move forward in a way that is also feeding us, in a way that is also supportive, the way that's also generative of who we are as workers as well as caregivers. So we're going to go into groups again, and I'm going to ask you to respond to 2 different questions again. And there will the Google Slides, are the Google Slides in the chat? So the questions are: name 2 concrete actions you can take. What are things that you could do to support these issues moving forward as a faculty, ally, department head? Write on the slides, or name actions that could be taken by organizations such as UA, CSWS, others on campus, or the university administration as a whole that would support these issues, improve conditions on campus for caretakers. And then 2, imagining the best case scenario around caregiving at the UO. What would it look like or feel like? Sort of thinking beyond the practical question of what could happen now, but what would the ultimate goal be if we were to be thinking aspirationally? So, oh, thank you for putting that there. So we'll go ahead and go into groups and sort of really try to think about these things in terms of both concrete actions we could take as caregivers or as allies, and then sort of really kind of imagine aspirationally, what would it mean to work at an institution that has integrated and taken family-friendly seriously. So, and again, it was really great to read your slides. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, so we just kind of want to think about the things that you are all talking about in your small groups. I really love the idea of a manifesto. That just sounds like something we should write, right? Like we should have a manifesto, a value statement about care as a human right, university-wide, the local level. People we care for have a right to our care, and we have a right to give care, as opposed to, this is like gets to changing the narrative of, you know, caregiving as a personal choice and an individual responsibility. So I think that's a really, I love that idea. I love the idea of a manifesto. Maybe we can continue to think about how we could do that, where it could live, and you know, be something that we are going to insist be part of this university culture. A lot of people had ideas around creating a care committee in their units, you know, building structures at the local level. And that is actually something that the administration consistently likes to talk about, is that we have to change the culture at the departmental level or at the unit level. Developing care committees is, I think, a really good way, and a lot of you had suggested doing that. I think that also the idea of, you know, feeling safe to be able to actually talk about caregiving at the local level. Like, what is going to have to change so that people can say without fear of any kind of value or judgment, or even, you know, structural kinds of implications, to say, I can't do something at that time, or I can't do something at this moment because I have X responsibility. I think sort of thinking about that aspirationally is really about transforming the culture, right? Transforming the institution to recognize care as a human right, both to receive and to give, but also how do we institutionalize it? How do we instrumentalize that as a given, as something that is important to all the units? And that's sort of why we have that last square as, what can we imagine here? You know, hopefully, you know, the next part of the timeline is an achievement. Maybe it'll be something significant, you know, accepted by the administration in the caregiving article. I don't know, maybe it'll be about a major mobilization movement we have as a rally. I know some people have suggested doing more public, outward facing kinds of collective actions. And actually, the student who was here with us at first, Kendall, wants to do a rally, and she wants to do a caregiving rally for the entire university at Johnson Hall, and is already really actually planning that. So we will be having a rally, and hopefully we can all participate. It'd be great to bring whoever you're caring for if you can, but we don't have any 4J days off during the next, you know, trimester. So it's except for Memorial Day. So we'd have to pull our kids out of school. Other things, are there other things that I haven't caught that people want to take note of in terms of thinking about concrete or aspirational ideas?
I think 4G has a break next, maybe it's too soon, next Friday.
One thing that came up in our group, which I think is a really interesting idea, is looking at departmental tenure and promotion guidelines and putting in language about care work, and trying to get a number, like as many units as possible, to do that in a coordinated way.
Mm. Do you have any examples of that being done?
I don't. It came up in our group discussion as something that we could sort of try to work into, you know, work through at the local level. But I just thought I would mention it because those plans have to be approved, you know, by deans and provosts. But if a bunch of departments did it together, then it might, I don't know, might have an impact.
Yeah, especially since we know caregiver burdens, that is where it plays out, so intensely during those moments. Other ideas? Maria, you were going to say something?
Yeah, one conversation that came up in our discussion group, which was really important, was the issue of diversity, and how even, in the language that we're using and in the policies that we're targeting, it's still very faculty centered, and a lot of it, it feels very tenured centered. So just being explicit of how, this is our start, but we need to diversify even our own language and our own approaches and our own ideas. Because as our caregiving needs are diverse, the population that provides, it's very diverse as well. And so I think we need to see this with a little bit more, be more attentive to it in our own efforts.
Definitely, really good point. Anybody else? Anything else for our concrete or aspirational ideas?
Lynn, I was just going to share that the event organizers today, we have been recording and saving everything in the chat and from the slides. And what we'll do is compile and organize all of the great ideas here and make sure that they get shared with participants and after the fact in the next week or two, so people can figure out how they want to follow up and that this conversation won't be forgotten.
Vera.
Well, I know there's this big push for a lot of mentoring events to be starting next year, and I was wondering maybe somehow the caregiving conversation could be folded into as part of that, but part of mentoring is mentoring about caregiving issues.
Is that at the provost level?
Yeah.
Is there anything that we need to address in the chat? And really emphasize the need to understand that caregiving is not necessarily contained or finite, that there are, to think about, it's funny because we get this time off for FMLA, we get this short time period, and it's assumed that when you're back and you're ready to go. But whatever you had your time off for is either still lingering, or you're still processing or dealing, or it's there and you have, adjustments. So I think it's really important to recognize that the model we have assumes a certain kind of like neoliberal idea that we, everything happens like clockwork, and then we are back to being functional, productive participants in the grind of the institution. So I think that really also gets to the need to shift the culture and change the narrative, which I feel really hopeful that we are actually doing that we are actually in the state where we have proposed an article in bargaining where we are multiple sites, Caregiving Campaign, and Melissa had put in links to all of the different ways and all the different efforts that are currently undergoing. And if you want to stay involved with the Working Families Caucus, with UA, please email. There are a lot of ways and a lot of spaces where these are at the top of our priorities, and we're really trying to work through and make a change. So with that, does anybody else have any closing comments or reflections?
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
I just wanted to take a moment to really thank our panelists. They have worked extraordinarily hard for a long time to do this, and it's been an amazing session. And I also really want to thank Janae and Christy for all the backup support and for all of you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Michelle McKinley too, who is on sabbatical this year, but has really been involved in all of this work.
Yes.
Thank you all so much. Until we see each other at the rally.